Lacey Jensen here. Today we are going to do a fun little take on minestrone soup. Instead of the regular macaroni noodles, we're actually going to use some butternut squash and caramelized onion ravioli in it. So a little fall twist on it. And then we're also going to put some cubed butternut squash in there. So a fun little twist on that. Then we're going to make a meatball wrap to have with it because we're going to have little meatballs go in our soup instead of just straight up ground beef. And then we'll put some in our wrap. We're going to slice up some Aunt Aggie's and bake them for it. So let's start by getting our oil heating up here. I'm going to put in about, I want to say a tablespoon of olive oil in here. And then we're going to dice up our onion and let that start to kind of caramelize and saute. And then we'll start prepping our meatballs. So I've got one good sized yellow onion here. I'm going to take off the whole outer layer here. And then we'll give it a nice dice and start sauteing it. That caramelization will allow the broth to our minestrone to have just so wonderful. So we'll get these diced up. And get them cooking, and then we're going to work on our meatballs. Today, we're just going to do a simple Italian beef meatballs. Now, my normal OG meatball for Italian meatballs that I make is half beef and half Italian sausage. But for minestrone soup, you typically just use ground beef. So I'm going to do an Italian spiced beef meatball on here because I think it will go well with the soup, which will have a lot of extra flavor and broth. Okay. So we've got our onions there. I'm going to get a spoon and give them a nice little toss. And then we can start making our beef. And I'm going to do kind of smaller meatballs because, again, it's in a soup and you don't want too big of a meatball in there. Okay, we've got those coated up. We'll let those start to saute. Okay, in here, since we're using about a pound of ground beef, I've got one slice of soft bread and one egg. So we are going to kind of soak our bread in some cream until it has soaked up all the cream and enough to make it, soggy enough to be a paste but not dripping full of extra liquid. So I've got it in there. It's going to be about 2 or so tablespoons of cream. Now, if you stick with and go with like a half and half or milk, you'll need to use a little bit less. So now we're going to add in our egg. And then we're going to add in some spices. I've got some Italian spices. We're going to add in about, I want to say a tablespoon. So a good amount because we really want to season it up and I want these meatballs to pop. And then we're going to add in some oregano, about a teaspoon. Onion powder. We're going to put in about a teaspoon and a half, and then about a teaspoon of garlic powder, or garlic salt, not garlic powder. Here we go. And this is going to be our flavored paste that is going to, it's called a panade, and it's going to season up our meatballs. So I'm going to go in with my hands, and we're going to essentially just squeeze it through our fingers until that whole bread and egg has turned into this nice flavored paste that will be the binder for our meatballs. And again, I'm going to do kind of mini meatballs. Think about like Italian wedding soup, how they have little teeny mini meatballs. That's what we're going to do. But maybe not that small because those are small. Okay, we've got our nice kind of paste here. I'm going to add in my ground beef. This is, again, right up on a pound of ground beef. Over here. And then the same process of kind of going through and making that panade. We're going to squeeze the meat and that paste through our fingers until we have it all incorporated. And that paste is going to keep our meatballs, it's going to keep them, hold them together. It's going to keep them tender and moist and very flavorful. There we go. So I want to just make sure it's all fully incorporated because if you miss anything bit of your ground beef, then it will be bland and firmer in texture than to the ones that have got mixed up with the panade. There we go. And you can typically tell that it's all mixed in, is that your meat will all be, you know, kind of one color, a little less bright pink because of that paste. Okay, let me grab my baking sheet and we're gonna roll out these meatballs. And again, I'm gonna do nice little tiny ones for our soup. But let me give my onions a little bit of a stir here. Now that it's kind of nice and warmed up on my Dutch oven, I'm gonna turn it down to about a 4. Okay, let's get our meatballs here. I'm just gonna pull off a small little ball. Now these will shrink up a little bit when they bake, and these are gonna cook up pretty fast because they are tiny, but not quite as tiny as Italian meatball soup or Italian wedding soup. Those are really tiny and a lot more work. So we'll get these rolling. And then I'm going to bake these at 350. So they'll take about 10 minutes or so to cook up at 350 since it's a little bit lower temperature. But that's because that's what we're gonna bake our Aunt Aggie's up. I pulled out a log of our Aunt Aggie's that we whipped up the other day. They're delicious cookies that you keep in the freezer and you just cut and bake. But it's just nice because I can whip up a baked good in no time.
You have a request, can you go over the meat mixture?
Yes. So these are like Italian beef meatballs. So with a pound, I have a pound of ground beef in here. And then we made a panade using 1 slice of soft bread, 1 egg, and about 2 tablespoons of cream. And then we added in about a half a tablespoon of onion powder, about a tablespoon of Italian seasoning because we want those flavors to really pop out, a teaspoon of oregano, and about a teaspoon and a half of garlic salt. So that's kind of the base, and we mix those all together. And now we'll kind of bake these up in our oven, and we're going to use some of them to go into our soup, and then some to go into our little kind of meatball pepperoni wraps that we'll have as part of our lunch with our soup. There we go. So just kind of taking like the classic idea behind a minestrone, which is a soup that has ground beef in it and kind of macaroni noodles, and we're gonna do, instead of ground beef, in the sense that we're doing mini meatballs and changing out the pasta for a ravioli. I've got another container of this butternut squash ravioli, which I thought would be wonderful. There we go. Do you see how many, just a pound of meat can make so many teeny tiny meatballs? Now they will shrink up more when you bake them because the fat will kind of seep out and that meat will seize in, just kind of like with a burger. When you cook a burger, it seizes in and gets smaller. So I expect them to be a good size smaller when they're done. And it doesn't take, you don't have to, have perfect little balls here. It doesn't take much to get them together. Probably got 1 more row or so left to make, and then we'll give our hands a good wash and we'll pop these in the oven to start cooking up. Normally when I make like a big batch of meatballs, by the end my meatballs get bigger and bigger and bigger because I'm like, I'm done rolling. Okay. Yeah, we'll just make him. He'll be a little bit bigger, but we're good. Let me wash my hands. And then we'll get these in the oven to bake up. Okay. I'm going to give my onions a quick stir before, and then we'll get them all baked up. So these are, again, our Italian beef meatballs made with, so normally I would do half and half beef, half Italian sausage, but these are all beef with lots of seasoning in them so that they'll really pop in our soup. we're gonna bake these at 350, and I'm gonna put my timer on for about 10 minutes because we don't need it for very long. Because they're tiny, they're gonna cook up pretty fast. Let's get our celery chopped up, and I realize I got a little bit on my finger still. Our celery chopped up, and then we'll get our soup going.
You have a question? Will you be cooking Friday night on Halloween?
Um, you know what? I don't know. I don't think so. We're gonna go out trick or treating and whatnot, so I don't think we'll cook at lunchtime, but I don't think we'll cook at Friday night because we'll be out and busy. And you know, we have like a tendency, every year we order Chinese food. It has been like throughout, even when I was a kid, we ordered Chinese food on Halloween every year. So we've got to keep up the tradition. Although, I mean, I think my kids eat half of their, actually like probably triple their calorie intake in candy. They always are opening, trying, deciding, sorting. We live in a neighborhood where I feel like we get a pretty good amount of candy. And my kids aren't, it's strange. Growing up as a kid, I was like, we hit every single house, and we didn't stop until it got to the point where it was like too late to be trick-or-treating. My kids, they do like the loop of our neighborhood, like the one street, about an hour of it, and then they're like, yeah, we're good, and they go home. And I'm always just like, where are you guys? It's crazy. One year when I was a kid, I did a double costume year where I hit it all through, and then I changed costumes so I could, on the way back, I could hit it all through. That was dedication, and it was exhausting. But I was like, our kids, I don't know. And I feel like it's, sometimes I get less and less trick-or-treaters. Our first years here, I still go through a lot of Halloween candy. I would say we probably, how many trick-or-treaters do you think we get? Over 100? So we get a lot of trick-or-treaters, but our first year, I think, living in our neighborhood, it was like 200. It was so many trick-or-treaters that we ran out of candy, so I had to like steal from my kids' baskets to give them because I gotta give it to the kids. But I'm always prepared. I get about 10 of those like jumbo bags of candy. My husband says it's something like 3,000 pieces of candy because I'm like the parent who like gives each kid a handful because I'm like, yeah, sugar up all you guys' kids on there. Gotta be known for being a good candy house. Okay, I've got our celery in here with our onions. We'll let those saute up now for just a second, and now we're gonna prep up our carrots and our butternut squash to go in here and saute. Then we'll add in our diced tomatoes and some tomato paste. We'll do our carrots first because they're a little bit firmer. So I've got 3 kind of good sized carrots. I'm gonna peel off this outer skin, and because it's just always dry and lacks kind of that flavor of it. It's more earthy. And then we're gonna quarter these and kind of dice them up because I don't want my vegetables to be too big. I like smaller bits in my soup. That way I can get more veggies in every bite. It also allows you to do kind of soup in a quicker amount of time because things will get tender faster. Okay, so we've got our carrots. I'm gonna cut off the tops and the bottom. So one Halloween, when I was a kid, my mom, it was the first time ever doing it, she made pumpkin soup. And it was the worst pumpkin soup. But then she told us we couldn't go trick-or-treating until we ate our bowl of pumpkin soup. And I think it was just always those things where when she like left the room, everybody like ladled their soup back into the soup containers so that we could go trick-or-treating. And then every year after that, it was my stepdad then just made his chicken wings on Halloween. And then when we moved to Tennessee when I was a kid, it turned out to Chinese takeout on Halloween. And I have kept that Chinese takeout on Halloween tradition every single year, my kids, because it's just, I don't know, with all those sweet candies, you just need something salty. Okay, we've got our carrots. just kind of diced up. I quartered them, at least the big ones, and have the smaller ones. And we're gonna toss these guys in here. Coat them up, let them give a good saute. Sauteing up your vegetables is going to allow the broth to have so much more flavor, and just makes it very much nicer than just dumping all the veggies in. Okay, I've got a little bit of butternut squash left over that we're gonna cube up and add into our soup. I will say, one butternut squash can yield a whole lot of veggie. I just bought another one the other day, as well as a buttercup squash, because they were on sale for like 69 cents a pound, which is a steal. So I was like, ooh, more stuff to make. I always say, you know, when I go to the store, that's why I'm like, oh, do you have an idea in mind? I'm like, no, I just buy what looks good at the store. And so squash is on the menu this week. They had in the little like fish area, they had black tip shark. So I'm really excited for our fish this week. To cook that up. I always like to try to do different fish and whatnot on there. So I'm excited to try that out. Changing it up. Okay, we're just gonna dice up our butternut squash here. Butternut squash is really great to throw into soup, especially ones that you're not gonna stew for a long time, because they get tender pretty fast. They're a really soft one, but they also soak up all of that flavor in your soup. But they do kind of, if you cook them too long, they will start to disintegrate. So they're great for soups that you aren't going to be stewing over a low temp for a long time, unless you're gonna make a bisque with it. So I've got our butternut squash in here. There we go. Toss it around. And we're gonna let that saute for just a second. And then, before we add our tomatoes or anything like in there, we're gonna actually put in our spices so it can heat up, and then some tomato paste. So I've got 2 bay leaves that I'm gonna add in here. There we go. That always just gives a nice aromatic notes to the broth, which I love. And then we're gonna use, similar to our meatballs, we're gonna use some oregano. I'm gonna add about, I wanna say, 1.5 teaspoons of dried oregano. You could use fresh. If you're gonna use fresh, I'd go a little bit more, like a tablespoon. And then we have our Italian seasoning. I'm gonna do about 1.5 teaspoons of this as well. And then we're just gonna do a little bit of onion powder. That's gonna just like cling to the broth and have a nice flavor. So about 1 teaspoon. And let's give this a good mix. Let that heat kind of toast up those spices and bring out their flavors. And then we'll make a little well in the middle, and we'll add our tomato paste in to kind of coat up the veggies. And then we'll add in our diced tomatoes.
Yo has a question for you.
What's for dinner tonight? Not 100% sure, but I am prepping a focaccia, so I know we're gonna have a focaccia for tonight's dinner. That's the only thing I can tell you that we're having. I have no idea. There's too many options at the beginning of the week because I just went shopping, and so, you know, when it goes down, you have like very few proteins left, then it's harder, but I've got so many options. Okay, let's start prepping up our tomatoes. Some of these are from our garden. So they'll go into our soup. I have a few out there that are green that now I'm worried when somebody told me that their green tomatoes never turn colors, that these might not turn colors because they have been on there for a while. So we might have to do a fried green tomato fest one day. Ooh, fried green tomato BLTs. That might be on the menu this week. I just think that sounds good. Okay, we're gonna dice these up. Now, you don't have to use fresh tomatoes. You can always use a can of diced tomatoes. But since I have fresh, I always like to use it. There we go. And the reason why we're not adding our tomatoes in before our tomato paste is because tomatoes are they're really juicy, and so if I add them before the tomato paste, that tomato paste isn't gonna get a chance to kind of get that heat and kind of the natural sugars kind of caramelize a little bit on the bottom of the pan. So I'm gonna make a little bit of a well in here. So I have a nice little spot on there that my tomato paste can kind of get some of that direct heat up first. And I'm gonna open this up, scoop it out, and then we'll go grab our meatballs out of the oven since they should be just about done. And then we can start cutting up our cookies to bake them. For our tomato paste, I'm gonna use about a heaping tablespoon, or your little kitchen spoon, a heaping one of that. So it's a little bit more than an actual measurement of tablespoon of it, but just a good amount of that. That's gonna give this really lovely tomato like flavor to the broth without it being like a tomato sauce. It will allow it to still be thin and delicious. Okay, we've got these covered. Let's go grab our meatballs out while that tomato paste kind of sits on those vegetables and cook up. Let me grab my trivet here. Beautiful. So we've got our nice little meatballs. As you see, they shrunk up because their natural fat kind of seasons out and drips out, but keeps them nice and juicy and delicious. So I'm gonna put them here to kind of cool down for a second. We will throw these into our soup, but again, I'm gonna use some of them for our little wraps. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna call them, like my meatball pepperoni pizza wrap, which I think will be yummy.
You have a question? What do you do with the leftover tomato paste?
So the leftover tomato paste, since I use a lot of it, I cover it up with just like some plastic wrap, kind of make sure it's in there, or press and seal, and then I put it in the fridge to keep it stored. As long as you use it within like a week, it should be good. If you don't use your tomato paste as often, you can now get tubes of tomato paste, which is great for if you don't use it as frequently. Because then you can just squeeze out what you need and then you seal it right back up, and those last forever on here. But I find that when I get to my winter cooking, I tend to use a lot of tomato paste because I use it in a lot of stews. Here we go. We're going to kind of coat up our tomatoes now. Here we go. I don't know why I slid my tomato thing over here because I'm going to be using that in just a second. Okay, we're gonna let this sit for just a second. Let those tomatoes heat up. While we do that, let's slice up our Aunt Aggie's. So it's a frozen kind of log that I popped out of the freezer. We're gonna slice it up and bake these. These bake at 350 in the oven, and they are a hit in our family. It's a recipe that's passed down through my husband's family. It's from the 1800s. They're really simple. They're like a hybrid between a butter cookie and a sugar cookie. So it's not as sweet as a sugar cookie, but a little bit more than a butter cookie. And it's kind of fun as you can, add lots of colors to them to make them more festive. So we always make these around the holidays. I always try to have a couple logs sitting in my freezer, so whenever my kids are like, oh, can I make a cookie here? I could have cookies for them in less than 10 minutes. Because you just slice it up, spread it out, and bake at 350 for 8 minutes. And they're gonna be like, when they first come out, like 5 minutes after they first come out, 5-10 minutes, they are so good because they're super soft then. But even then, these firm up, and so the next day they're like a nice kind of butter cookie, which is just like a sugar butter cookie. They're delicious. But we made these up earlier. They last in the freezer for like 3 months, so they last forever. And we're gonna bake them up. They don't spread out too much when you bake them, just a little bit, so you can't have them touching each other, but you can have just a small gap between them. Works. Realize I have these rows off. Should learn to count. Okay. And I will say the dough, my kids love the dough of these as well. But you just take them out of the freezer right before you're about to bake up. I always let them sit for a few minutes. That just makes them slightly easier to cut, but you need them cold. And then you bake them. So these are my fall colors. We have, you know, orange, green, yellow, and red, but I always change them up for the holidays as well. Here we go. See if I can get out of these little nubs. We'll have 2 baby ones at the very end. Okay, let's go pop these in. These are going to bake for just about 8 minutes. Make sure you get there. They're not ones that you want to leave in, because if you overcook them, then they turn into crisp, which are still good, but they're better when they're soft. So I'm gonna set my timer at 7 minutes, 30 seconds, so I know to get here, because gotta be precise. 8 minutes it is. Okay, well, let's get on to our soup. We're gonna start adding our broth into our soup, and then we'll start making our wraps. We don't need to add our ravioli in until closer to when we're about to serve, because ravioli takes about, 4 minutes to cook up. Same with like a tortellini or whatnot. So I've got my tomatoes and the tomato paste cooking. So this is essentially like a mirepoix. And that's gonna add so much flavor. So we're gonna start by adding in about a cup of water. I'm gonna add a scoop of chicken bouillon later, but you could also use chicken broth if you wanted to. We're gonna add in just 1 cup first. Make sure you scrape the bottom of the pan to get all those seasonings off.
You have a question? Do you have the recipe posted for the cookies?
I do. This is one that I have the recipe posted. I believe it was a freebie that I gave out in the spring, so everybody should have that one. But I have made this one several times because, again, it is a family favorite here. Everyone absolutely loves these cookies. And it's because they're just simple. They're just a nice kind of simple cookie. Not too much is going on with them, but they're delicious.
And when you get a second, can you go over what's in the soup so far?
Yes, so right now in the soup we have onions, celery, carrots, butternut squash, tomato paste, diced tomatoes, and then we have Italian seasoning, bay leaves, oregano, and some onion powder. And this is making our base for it, so it will have kind of a nice thinner tomato broth base, so not like a bisque one. But that tomato paste gives it a nice acidity and tomato flavor to it without giving it a thick texture. Here we go. So we've got our 4 cups of water in here, and now we're gonna add a nice big scoop of chicken bouillon. This is gonna give the saltiness and the wonderful flavor to it. You can also use vegetable bouillon, that works well too. But I like the chicken kind of flavor to it. So we're gonna do a big, kind of a heaping tablespoon. Got a little teeny tiny spoon right here, so we're gonna mix it in. And then we're gonna let that simmer for a little while, let it come to a boil. Don't add, your ravioli is something you wanna add towards the very end. Don't add it in too soon or you're gonna get mushy ravioli. But we will add our kidney beans in a little bit. That's kind of another staple in a minestrone soup, is the kidney beans. Let's get our wraps going. I'm gonna start turning on my skillet here to start warming up over like a medium heat, medium low. It takes a hot minute for it to kind of warm up, and I want it to be ready so we can kind of crisp these guys up. Okay, we're gonna do 2, apparently I don't know how to open this. There we go. We're gonna do 2 wraps. And we're gonna put inside them some of our meatballs. I'm gonna cut up some pepperoni as well as mozzarella and some kind of pizza sauce, which I feel will go well with the soup.
You have a question? Where'd you get that skillet?
So this is a hex-clad skillet, or they call it their griddle pan. Absolutely love it. I do have it in my Amazon storefront. I will say I use this thing all the time. I was hesitant when I first got it. I'm like, oh, how much am I gonna actually use like a griddle pan? I use it all the time. I actually made pancakes for my kids earlier today on them. So they're great for pancakes, wraps, grilled cheeses, really anything, tortillas when I make homemade tortillas. They're great on here. So we're gonna spread a little bit of butter on just one side of each of the wraps. And coat that up. You don't need a whole lot, but just enough to give it a nice little good kind of butter crisp when we kind of fry it up on there, because we want the cheese and everything to melt inside. I'm gonna slice up some pepperonis. Now, you can always leave the pepperonis whole, but the problem is these are big pepperonis, and if you leave them whole, you'll like pull a huge pepperoni out when you eat it. So cutting them up just makes them a little bit easier to eat. So I've got a good, chunk here. And we're just gonna kind of cut it through, and then I'm gonna separate them apart so that I can kind of put them all throughout, so we get nice pepperoni chunks with the beef meatballs and then some pizza sauce and mozzarella, and we'll crisp it up, and it'll be a really delicious kind of pizza wrap, which I think is going to sit really well with the minestrone soup, because it again has that nice Italian tomato flavor on it. Okay, these are just about broken up. You can also use mini pepperonis if they have those at the store, or regular size, but I really love a good deli pepperoni. I think they're delicious.
You have a request to do your Friday lunch in costume?
In costume. We'll see. I think I could do it. I tried on like my little waistcoat type thing, because I'm gonna be Scrooge McDuck for it. So I do have, I'm gonna get my little hack here to open this up. So I think I could probably do it. My kids were playing with the little plastic cane earlier. So it'll be fun. I used to work with, teach, and I would always dress up for Halloween as well. And I wore it every year because I had different kids, but I had this Cinderella costume that was just big and ridiculous, and they always loved me. They'd be like, "Are you a princess?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." Okay, let's spread on a little bit of marinara sauce. Again, you don't need a whole lot. You don't want it to be soupy inside your wrap, but you do want a good on there. There we go. Slide this over. We check on our cookies here, about less than a minute, so I can start sprinkling some of our pepperoni. I'm not going to do it all at one time, because I'm going to kind of do it in stages, so we're not just getting all in one bite. We're going to do a little bit of mozzarella too. Again, we're going to do this in stages so that it's kind of spread evenly throughout our wrap. Here we go. And let me grab a spatula, since we're gonna grab off a couple of our meatballs. I'm gonna put them throughout. There we go. And then let's head over to our oven to get our Aunt Aggie's cookies out, because we don't want them to overcook. Bruni, Grace. Now these, I always say, set your timer a little bit early so you have time to get there. These are our beautiful Aunt Aggie's cookies. They are always fun, beautiful in color. You can dye them any colors you want. Absolutely love them. Delicious. Mix between a butter cookie and a sugar cookie, so they're not super sweet. You can eat multiple at one time and you don't feel so bad, because they're small cookies. And I think that's what's really nice about them, is they are just a nice kind of smaller cookie, but they're delicious. Now you can't eat them right away, because if you try to take them off right now, they will fall apart. They need to sit on your cookie tray for about 5 minutes before they are ready to kind of take off and move around. And then eventually they completely firm up. But that first 5-10 minutes afterwards, those are the best. Okay, we've got our meatballs in here. Add a little bit more to my husband's. I'm going to throw in some more pepperoni. There we go. And more mozzarella cheese. And now we're going to do our lovely little wrap. My trick is you can load it with a lot, but don't overload it. Now we have it tucked in, and now we should be able to put it right on our pan. Make sure you put it seam side down so that it can like toast together. Here we go. Tuck those little meatballs in. There we go. Now we're gonna let these kind of toast up. I'm gonna put it a little bit higher now on a 5. I'll wash my hands because they've got a little bit of butter on it. And then we're gonna finish off our soup here. We've got a nice little simmer bubble going on it. So I'm gonna give it a nice stir, but you can see it's starting to simmer up. And the nice thing about it is also sauteing the veggies is going to allow them to like get nice and like thick or like soft sooner. Let me scoop all that off in there. I'm gonna taste the broth, see if I need to add any more chicken bouillon to it or not.
You have a question? You save the unused tomato paste. How long can you save it for?
As long as you push, like, so what I do is when I'm done with it, I want to show you, this is going to help make it last longer in your fridge. And I will say it lasts about a week, but you got to make sure you don't have any air touching it. So I take my plastic wrap or press and seal, but you put it in here and just push it down, just like you would with like guacamole, where you take out any of the extra, like the air that can touch it. And then I'll keep it in my fridge for about a week. I typically use it within a week so it doesn't last more on it. Now you can get tomato paste in little tubes, which last much longer, which I typically always have some in my fridge as well. And I do like those a lot. Okay, I'm gonna grab my beans. Since we're making a minestrone, you don't ever wanna just pour your can of beans into your soup. You need to rinse and strain them so that they get all of their starchy bean water off of them. I'm doing a light kidney bean, which is pretty common in minestrones, a kidney bean, but also I find that the cannellini, the white beans, are lovely as well. Now I prefer the light kidney beans over the dark kidney beans because I feel like the dark kidney beans have a stronger flavor. So we're gonna put our beans in here now, and then we're gonna put our meatballs in there so they can start kind of soaking up that flavor from the broth, and then we'll put our ravioli in here as well. Check on that in a second. Let's get our ravioli first, and then we'll do our meatballs. So these only take a few minutes to cook up, and again, you want to do this towards the end. The beans are already pre-cooked, so I always do them towards the end so they don't get too mushy either. So we're gonna throw in, this is butternut squash and caramelized onion ravioli, which I know minestrone typically uses macaroni noodles, but I thought this would be a fun little twist, and we did add some butternut squash into our soup as well.
You have a question? Would you ever consider going on a cooking show like MasterChef?
You know, I might. I think if it worked with my schedule and my family and everything like that, I feel like I would. Now, I would be terrified, and I'd probably get kicked off the first week because I'd probably be like the whole time and mess up and put like sugar instead of salt or do something crazy. But I always feel like it would be fun. I'm always up for a challenge. You know, because you just never know where life can take you. Here we go. Give this a nice stir. Then I'm going to check on our wraps here. Beautiful. Look at this guy. He needs a little bit more heat on that side. But we've got our wrap first time. And then I've got my ravioli. We've got to pop it underneath. With the ravioli, when they cook up, they kind of bubble up to the top. But we're going to just keep them so they get nice and tender. Here we go. They're floaters. They've got that little air pocket with that cheese in there. So just always gently tap them down below so that they don't pop over. And then we're gonna add our meatballs in here, which will sink in and it's not gonna overflow. I always say if I could actually put it in there, only I missed it. I got a little bit of meatball juices there. There we go. Here we go. We're gonna add in our, I'm gonna bring this closer. Here we go. And then we'll slide those in. Beautiful. Once they dip under, they'll soak in there and perfect. Let me taste my broth. Beautiful. Okay, we're gonna gently put it in here. Let me steal a little ladle here. So we've got it just a smidge to the top. There we go. We can add it back in later if we want to, but let's tuck this down in here. Good thing there's nothing else going into our soup. Beautiful. Ah, should have grabbed the one size up pot. It's the ravioli. I blame the ravioli. Okay, let's get our sandwich here flipped. Beautiful. Perfect. So we've got this guy is just about. I'm gonna turn this down nice and slow, and then let's get our stuff out ready to plate up. I'm gonna move my cookie plate here. And as you can see, when the cookies have cooled, when you take them out, they're puffy, but when they've cooled, they settle down and they're nice and chewy, and just look, they've got like beautiful. They're not super thick, but they are delicious and very, very soft, which I absolutely love. And the cameraman, of course, will help himself to his commission. Let me slide this out of the way. Let's get this guy down really low. Now that they're things, you can see the ravioli is done because they're all popped up to the top like little balloons, little lifeboats. Here we go. But I think that's what's gonna make them so delicious in this soup. This minestrone, it's like a different take on it. Let me grab my little cauldron. And you know what? Actually, we'll cut our pizza wraps in half here. Beautiful. They are just perfect. So I'm going to take them off. So we've got this nice kind of crispy edge on both sides. And that's from that butter on there. And I'm going to slide my soup over here so that we can ladle it up. There we go. And where did I set it down? I thought I had Parmesan cheese out here, but I must have forgot. There it is, right over there. Because you can't have minestrone soup without Parmesan cheese. And now let's get ready to serve this up. We grab my ladle. Okay, for lunch today, we have our fun little take on our minestrone soup. We used butternut squash ravioli. We made some beef meatballs, and then we have it filled with our lovely veggies, red kidney beans, celery, carrots, onions, and let me add one more little ravioli on top of there for a really delicious, fun take on our minestrone. We're gonna add some freshly grated Parmesan cheese to the top. And then for our little sandwich today, we have our meatball and pepperoni marinara crunch wrap that we sauteed in our pan to give a nice crispy edge to it, but still tastes kind of like a pizza. Plus our Aunt Aggie's cookies, which are a fun little, colorful mix between a sugar and a butter cookie for a nice little delicious treat. Okay guys, well thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page, search for what we made. So we've got our ravioli minestrone and our meatball and pepperoni wrap with our Aunt Aggie's cookies. You can always watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my little griddle pan from HexClad in there, my Dutch ovens, knives, all the different things I use in my kitchen I have there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget